The three biggest names in the game when it comes to smartphone photography right now are the Google Pixel 5, the iPhone 12 Pro Max, and the more recently released Galaxy S21 Ultra. Each device's camera setups have their own strengths. For example, Google's system is massively software focused, whereas Apple focuses on continuity between its three lenses, and Samsung is just going for pure hardware with a stacked camera setup. So, what happens when you put them all together head to head? Which one comes out on top? Is it the beastly $1,200 Ultra or the relatively affordable $700 Pixel? Well, that's what we're going to find out today. This is the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra versus Google Pixel 5 versus iPhone 12 Pro Max camera shootout. Looking at the specs quickly, you'll notice that the Pixel 5 has the fewest cameras. By comparison, the Samsung has the most cameras, the longest zoom, the largest main sensor. Yeah, there's a lot of hardware here, and not even the iPhone can match that. On paper, there's no competition, the Samsung takes it. Moving over to the samples, we'll look at several different aspects: daylight, detail, HDR, low light, zoom, ultra-wide and portrait modes. Daylight. Straight away, the images from Samsung are more saturated and vibrance heavy than those from Apple and Google. This is down to the use of scene optimizer, which sometimes boosts these properties when it detects flowers or the sky, for example. This is most prevalent in this image of a bush, where the reds and greens are really saturated in the Samsung image. The Pixel 5's image by comparison is more muted, and the iPhone seemed to be the most washed out, though it does appear brighter than the Pixel's image. Disabling the scene optimizer on the Samsung brings the colours back down in line with the others. In fact, in this image of chocolate strawberries, shows saturation and exposure to be almost identical between the three, with slight white balance differences. The Google Pixel 5's image is darker than the others as it exposes more for the brighter points. That said, the sky in the background is still blown out. Outdoors, the iPhone 12 Pro Max's camera can't quite manage to expose correctly. For example, in this shot of a muddy path, it's overexposing compared to the other two, especially the Pixel, which is underexposing if anything. The iPhone captures more accurate colours than the Samsung, but the Pixel's just looks the most pleasing. Detail. Each of these images is 12 megapixel despite the Samsung sensor being 108 megapixels. This is because the S21 Ultra sensor is binning down to 12 megapixels by default. There is a mode to go up to 108, but we're sticking with the standard photo modes here. You'd expect the Samsung's image to have considerably more detail given its higher resolution sensor, but even when zooming in on a larger computer display, the difference in quality between the final images is actually quite hard to tell. When cropping in on these images of a bun, it's easier to see over-sharpening artifacts from the Samsung and less so from the iPhone. The Pixel 5's image, by comparison, looks more natural thanks to the lack of major digital sharpening. It's the same story with the photo of a church. Zooming in or cropping in reveals that the Pixel 5's image is the most natural looking because it's not going for that overly processed look. The 12 Pro Max comes in a little more sharpened and the Galaxy's image is looking the most heavily processed here. Overall, the Pixel 5 does the best job at capturing detail in a natural, clean manner. HDR. HDR technology is essential to help avoid overexposing highlights and underexposing shadows, although even the best phones have their limitations. In this extreme case with a heavily backlit chameleon, the Pixel 5's camera exposes for the shadows the most, making the background rather washed out, though not too bad given its conditions. This is an extreme case after all. That said, there is a lot of noise and artifacts in the shadowy corners of the image. By comparison, the iPhone 12 Pro Max exposes for the background, which crushes the blacks in the foreground, whereas the S21 Ultra balances the two with the most neutral exposure. I personally call the S21 Ultra's image the most impressive due to the camera's ability to balance the background and the foreground, or in this case, the shadows and the highlights. Shooting directly into sunlight, this is where the 12 Pro Max struggles compared to the competition. Detail in shaded areas in front of the trees is mostly lost, as is in the fallen tree towards the middle of the image. The S21 Ultra and Pixel 5 are actually pretty close in terms of dynamic range and recoverable information, but you can definitely tell that Samsung's scene optimizer is boosting everything to create an unrealistic image. Samsung does the best at balancing highlights and shadows for best HDR results, Google's results close behind but can end up a little darker, and Apple's is the weakest in terms of HDR, struggling to extract shadow details, erring on the side of overexposure if anything. Low light. Let's take a look at some low light and night mode photography. These photos of a vinyl collection with night mode turned off clearly show the S21 Ultra's advantageously huge sensor. There's more detail across the board compared to the Pixel 5's blurry image. The iPhone's, however, is really impressive, presenting plenty of detail across the board despite the challenging conditions, though the image is still quite a bit darker than the Samsung's. Night mode on this time, and it narrows the quality gaps between all three devices quite significantly. All three are now brightly exposed, and the Galaxy S21 Ultra's image is particularly bright and sharp. The Pixel's and iPhone's images appear softer, though oddly more saturated. Using night mode outside in the shots of these buildings, the Samsung gains a more convincing lead. For one, it appears the sharpest of the three, but also there's more detail in the shadows, such as in the plants in the foreground. In the most extreme example yet, we see the Galaxy S21 Ultra pull ahead thanks to its huge sensor. In this shot of the back of a building, the Pixel and iPhone really struggle to capture a sharp image at all. The trees in the foreground are very blurry and there's barely any detail in the sky, but the Samsung's image is miles sharper and captures the stars more clearly too. This is a very clear win. Overall, the Samsung's night mode is by far the most powerful. Zoom. It's no surprise that Samsung steals the zoom category thanks to its implementation of not one but two dedicated optical zoom cameras, one at 3 times and one at 10 times. In this 7x shot of a digger, the Ultra's image is so sharp and crisp, at least out in the shadows. In this 10x shot of the rooftops, the quality disparity is accentuated even further. The iPhone's and Pixel's images look smeary and soft and nearly unusable. By comparison, the Ultra's image is very sharp. There's heaps more detail in the foreground and the background. It's not even a competition. Between the iPhone and the Pixel, however, the iPhone's image appears more artificially sharpened, again like what we saw with the cropping in before, whereas the Pixel's image looks more natural, if not as sharp. Ultra-wide. Of the three devices, the Pixel 5 has the narrowest ultra-wide lens, so it doesn't capture as big of a field of view as the iPhone and the Samsung. In terms of dynamic range, the iPhone 12 Pro Max seems to fall here compared to the S21 Ultra and the Pixel 5, as shown in the trees in the image of this river. In this wide-angle shot of a digger from earlier, the Pixel 5 captures the most detail in the shadowy areas while maintaining accurate and neutral colours in the sky and the grass. The Samsung's image, by comparison, is overly saturated, and the iPhone's image appears the brightest. Portrait. For portrait pictures, the Galaxy S21 Ultra and iPhone 12 Pro Max have dedicated laser-based depth sensing tech to assist with focus and foreground detection. Combined with software-based depth sensing techniques like those we see in the Pixel 5, this hardware can help produce a very accurate-looking bokeh blur. These photos of some flowers show this benefit in more challenging lighting conditions, especially compared to the other two in the lower portion of the image, where they got a bit confused with the leaf stems. There are some photos of Rob here which show that despite the superior portrait performance, edge detection when it comes to fur and hair can really prove to be challenging even for the S21 Ultra. The iPhone 12 Pro Max's edge detection compares well with the Pixel 5's in this shot of Rob indoors. That said, the Pixel's ability to capture details in the skin tones prevails here. Samsung has taken the win in almost every category in this video, and it makes sense. The Galaxy S21's hardware is superior to both the iPhone 12 Pro Max and the Pixel 5 setups. On top of that, Samsung has built up its processing in areas such as the portrait mode and the HDR function to the point where it competes with Google's and Apple's processing. You might prefer the individual color profiles of Samsung, Apple or Google, but objectively Samsung does take the win in this camera shootout. I've been Ryan Thomas with Android Authority, and I'll catch you later.